Discovered my wife's infidelity after my cancer diagnosis. Rewrote my will. The doctor's words echoed in my skull like a funeral bell. Stage 3. Aggressive. 6 months, maybe a year with treatment. It wasn't supposed to end like this. Not now. Not when I had spent my whole life building something worth leaving behind. I walked out of the hospital in a daze, the Los Angeles skyline a blur of neon and regret. My first thought was of Claire, my wife of 11 years. I needed to tell her. I needed to see her face when she heard the news. Would she cry? Would she hold me and whisper that we'd fight this together? I wasn't prepared for the truth I was about to uncover. That night, I drove home slower than usual, my mind drifting between memories and the stark reality of mortality. When I pulled into our driveway, I saw that the house was dark, except for a faint glow upstairs. My heart ached at the thought of breaking the news to her, but before I could open the door, my phone vibrated. A message. Unknown number. I thought you should know. Your wife isn't who you think she is. I stared at the screen, my pulse hammering. The message came with a video. What I saw next shattered me more than the diagnosis ever could. Discovered my wife's infidelity. After my cancer diagnosis, rewrote my will, I hesitated before pressing play, my thumb hovering over the screen. A part of me already knew. I had seen the signs before, subtle and easy to dismiss. The late nights, the sudden interest in work events, the way she pulled away when I reached for her. But I needed to see it. The video began with shaky footage. A hotel room, dim lighting, the familiar silhouette of my wife Claire, standing near the bed, laughing. Then a man entered the frame. Tall, confident. He wrapped his arms around her waist and kissed her, slow and familiar. I felt something crack inside me. The video ended, but the damage was done. The unknown sender followed up with another message. This isn't the first time. If you want proof, I can give it to you. I clenched the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. My first instinct was rage, blind, unforgiving rage. But I forced myself to think. If this was real, if Claire had been doing this behind my back, I needed to be smart. I texted back, "Who are you?" Seconds later, a response. "Someone who hates being lied to as much as you." Another message followed, this time with an address. "If you want to know the truth, meet me here tomorrow at 10 p.m. Come alone." The investigation begins. I barely slept that night. When I did, I dreamed of Claire, of the life we built, of the vows she shattered. I woke up drenched in sweat, the weight of betrayal pressing against my chest. By morning, my mind was set. If she had betrayed me, I needed to know everything. And if I was running out of time, I wasn't going to waste another second, but I wasn't going to walk into this blind. Before heading to the address, I made a call to an old friend, Mark Delaney, a former private investigator who used to work corporate cases before he got burned out. He owed me a favor, and tonight I was cashing in. "Need a quiet tale on my wife," I told him. Mark was silent for a beat. Then, "You sure you want to open that door?" "She already opened it," I said. By nightfall, I drove to the meeting spot, a rundown parking lot near a bar on the outskirts of town. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows. A figure leaned against a black sedan, hood up, cigarette burning between his fingers. As I stepped closer, he tossed something at me, a manila envelope. "Everything you need to know is in there," he muttered. I opened it, my pulse spiking as I flipped through the photos. Claire and the man from the video, meeting at different hotels, restaurants, even in our own goddamn city. One photo stood out, Claire holding a key card, entering a suite at the Blackwood Hotel just last week. Beneath the photos was a note. "This isn't just an affair." She's planning something. Be careful. I looked up, but the man was already gone. My hands shook as I stared at the evidence. My wife wasn't just cheating on me. She was up to something far worse. Discovered. My wife's infidelity. After my cancer diagnosis, rewrote. My I sat in my car with the manila envelope on the passenger seat, my breath shallow, my hands tightening around the steering wheel. The weight of the evidence pressed down, on me, heavier than the cancer that had invaded my body. Claire had betrayed me. But the note, she's planning something. That part gnawed at me. Affairs were one thing, selfish, cruel, but predictable. Planning something. That meant deception beyond lust. I wasn't going to sit back and wait to find out. Step 1. Following the trail. The next morning, I called in sick to work, not that it mattered much anymore. Instead, I followed Claire's routine from a distance. She left for work, her car pulling out of the driveway like any other day. 1:30 p.m., lunch break. Except she didn't go to the cafe she usually raved about. She drove across town to a quiet restaurant I had never heard of. I followed, parking a few spots away. When she stepped inside, I waited. 5 minutes later, a man walked in, tall, athletic, the same man from the video. I felt my stomach twist. They sat in the far corner, leaning in close, speaking in hushed tones. This wasn't passion, it was conspiracy. I couldn't hear them, but I could see the way she gripped his hand, the way his eyes scanned the restaurant like they had something to hide. Then she slid something across the table, a USB drive. My heart pounded. What the hell are you doing? Claire? I took out my phone and snapped a picture, then another. And another. Step 2. Digging deeper. That night, I met Mark Delaney in a dimly lit bar, my phone screen glowing between us. Recognize this guy? I asked, showing him a close-up of Claire's secret companion. Mark squinted, then frowned. Yeah, that's Adam Reeves, works in finance, some high-end investment firm. But a couple of years ago, he got mixed up in some insider trading scandal. I exhaled slowly. You're telling me my wife's sleeping with a white-collar criminal? Not just sleeping with him, Mark muttered. He pointed at the USB drive in the photo. She's giving him something. My pulse quickened. You need to check your accounts, Mark said. Banking, investments. If she's passing off information, there's a chance she's moving money, and if she is, then she's not just cheating, I murmured. She's robbing me blind. Step 3. Checking the finances. The next morning, I logged into our joint accounts. At first glance, nothing seemed off. The numbers added up. But then I checked the hidden accounts, the ones Claire didn't know about. One was drained, nearly $500,000 missing, gone, vanished, dispersed into multiple small transfers, just below the threshold that would flag suspicion, a pit. Formed in my stomach. This wasn't just betrayal, this was premeditated. Claire wasn't just sleeping with another man, she was preparing to leave me, and she was planning to do it before I even had the chance to die. He regretted cheating with her. Adam Reeves thought he knew what he was doing. The affair had started like they all do, thrilling, forbidden, reckless. Claire had walked into his office one evening, her perfume lingering in the air as she leaned on his desk, tracing her finger along the polished wood. My husband doesn't deserve me, she had whispered. But I think I deserve you. At the time, it had seemed like a good idea. A powerful, beautiful woman throwing herself at him. What man would say no? But now, staring at the ceiling of the Blackwood Hotel suite, Adam felt sick. This wasn't just an affair anymore. This was something else. Claire lay beside him, draped, in silk sheets, her breathing soft and steady. The morning sun spilled through the blinds, cutting sharp lines across the room. Adam turned his head and watched her, studying the woman who had pulled him into this mess. He thought back to last night, The way she had slid the USB drive across the table, the way she had smiled when he took it. "It's all set, darling," she had purred. "Just make sure everything's moved before he finds out." Adam had gone along with it. But now, in the daylight, the weight of it crushed him. She wasn't just cheating on her husband. She was destroying him, and he had helped her do it. The guilt sets. Adam sat up, rubbing his face, trying to shake the nausea crawling up his throat. He had told himself from the beginning that this was just a fling, a distraction. But it wasn't. Claire had pulled him in deeper than he ever intended to go. And then there was him, the husband. Adam didn't know much about the guy, only what Claire had told him, boring, predictable, oblivious. But the way she talked about him, it never sat right with Adam. And now, knowing the man had cancer, Adam clenched his jaw. He hadn't signed up for this. He thought about walking away, about cutting things off before it was too late. But it was already too late. His fingerprints were on everything. The financial transfers, the stolen money, the betrayal. If Claire went down, he would go down with her. A dangerous realization. A soft voice pulled him from his thoughts. "You're quiet this morning." Adam turned. Claire was awake, watching him with those sharp, knowing eyes. He forced a smirk. "Just thinking about what comes next." She stretched cat-like and smiled. "You're thinking too much, darling. Everything is under control." Adam nodded, playing along. But in his gut, he knew the truth. Nothing was under control. And soon, everything was going to crash down around them. Would you like to continue with Adam trying to escape this mess, Claire manipulating him further, or the protagonist closing in on them? Let me know how you want the story to unfold. I carefully planned my revenge. I stared at the computer screen, my hands steady despite the storm raging inside me. The evidence was all there. Bank transfers, hotel records, the pictures Mark had taken, the messages between Claire and Adam, proof of their affair, proof of their scheme, proof that they had already carved me out of my own life while I was busy fighting for what little time I had left. They thought I was dying. They thought I was weak. They had no idea what was coming. Step 1. Setting the trap. I spent the next few days laying the groundwork. I didn't confront Claire. I didn't tip her off. Instead, I played my role. Loving husband, terminally ill, none the wiser. At night, I worked in the shadows. I met with my lawyer, made changes to my will. If Claire thought she was walking away with everything, she was in for a surprise. The house, the accounts, the investments, every last asset was about to slip through her fingers. Then, I made a call. "Mr. Donovan," I said, keeping my voice measured, "I need a favor, a big one." Donovan was a private investigator who specialized in high-stakes cases, cheating spouses, corporate fraud, the kind of dirty secrets people paid fortunes to keep hidden. And now, Claire and Adam were going to be his next targets. Step 2. Letting them hang themselves. I left breadcrumbs, small intentional clues to make Claire feel comfortable, to make her think I was still oblivious. Casual mention of our joint savings, an offhand comment about updating my life insurance policy, an offer to take a trip together, one last vacation before things get bad. I watched her reaction carefully, the hesitation, the calculating glint in her eye. She was waiting for the right moment to make her move, and I was waiting for her to take the bait. Step 3. The killing blow one evening, I told Claire I had a doctor's appointment that would take a few hours. Then I left. Only I didn't go to the hospital. I drove to the Blackwood Hotel. Mark had already confirmed they had a standing reservation, a private suite Claire had been paying for out of the money she stole from me. I waited in the parking lot, my heart a slow, steady drum. At exactly 8:45 p.m., Claire and Adam walked in hand, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. I let them get comfortable. Then, I made my move. With a flash drive full of evidence and a carefully timed phone call, I set everything in motion. By the time Claire and Adam emerged from their little love nest, the wheels of destruction were already turning. Claire's bank accounts, frozen. The stolen money, seized. The police, alerted. And the pièce de résistance, a little email to Adam's employer with every dirty financial secret he thought he had buried. By morning, he wouldn't just be out of a job. He'd be facing federal charges. As for Claire, she was about to realize that the husband she had betrayed wasn't the fool she thought he was. She wanted my life. I was about to take hers apart piece by piece. Revenge for betrayal. Claire had no idea her world was already crumbling beneath her feet. She came home that night like nothing had changed, slipping off her heels and sighing as she poured herself a glass of wine. She even smiled at me, that same, fake practiced smile she had perfected over the years. I smiled back. I had spent the entire day making sure every part of my plan was in place. Adam was finished. The moment he arrived at work the next morning, he'd find security waiting for him. His computer would be seized, his financial records combed through. Insider trading was one thing. Embezzling money through an affair with a married woman whose husband had cancer? That was the kind of scandal that would follow him forever. Claire was next. She was about to learn that everything she had stolen, everything she had planned, had been for nothing. I sipped my drink as I watched her, my voice calm when I spoke. I had an interesting day today. She glanced at me, oblivious. Oh? Yeah, I said. I checked our bank accounts. I saw it then, the flicker of panic behind her eyes. She covered it quickly, setting her wine down with a careful smile. Why? I wanted to make sure everything was in order, I said. Since, time isn't exactly on my side. She shifted in her seat. I let the silence stretch just long enough to watch her squirm. Then I leaned forward. Imagine my surprise when I found $500,000 missing. The blood drained from her face. She opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. Not yet. Imagine my surprise, I continued, my voice softer now, when I found out where it went and who you gave it to. Her breath hitched. I pulled out my phone, opened. The photos Mark had taken and slid it across the table. The images of her and Adam in their hotel suite. The bank transfers. The messages. Cold, hard proof. Her hands trembled as she reached for the phone, her eyes darting over the evidence of her betrayal. She started, but I wasn't finished. I also had an interesting conversation with my lawyer, I cut in. About my will. The color drained from her face completely. Oh, yes, I said, smiling now. You didn't think I'd leave you everything, did you? You really thought I'd just lie down and die while you walked away with my money, my house, my life? She swallowed hard. It's all gone, Claire. My voice was like steel now. Every single cent you thought you were going to take, it's locked away. You get nothing. She looked like she might be sick. And Adam? I chuckled, shaking my head. Well, I hope he enjoys unemployment, because by tomorrow morning he's going to be under federal investigation. I stood, walking, around the table, until I was towering over her. You tried to ruin me, I said quietly. You thought you'd get away with it. I leaned in, my voice nothing but a whisper now. But you forgot one thing, Claire. Her lips parted, but she couldn't. Speak, I'm not dead yet. The moment Claire realized she lost Claire stared at me, her breathing uneven, fingers clutching the phone like a lifeline she knew was already slipping away. I watched as the reality of her situation settled in. The woman who always had an answer, always had control, now looked like a trapped animal. She swallowed, forcing a shaky breath. You don't understand. It's not what you think. I let out a slow chuckle, shaking my head. They always say that, don't they? I leaned in, placing my hands on the table, letting her feel just how much control she no longer had. Claire, don't insult me. I know everything. Her hands trembled. She looked at the phone again, scrolling through the messages, as if she could will them out of existence. I let her. Let her see the walls closing in, then her face hardened. This is your fault, she snapped suddenly, desperation flashing into anger. You think I wanted this? You left me with no choice. I laughed. A real, genuine laugh. No choice? Claire, you drained my accounts, screwed my so-called friend, and planned to walk away with everything. That wasn't survival. I tilted my head, studying her. That was greed. She opened her mouth to argue, but I wasn't interested. I stepped back, pulling another envelope from my pocket and tossing it onto the table. That's your official eviction notice. You have 3 days to get out of this house. Her eyes widened. You can't do that. Oh, I can. And I did. I crossed my arms. You might want to check your bank account, too. Pretty empty, isn't it? She grabbed her phone and started frantically tapping. A few moments passed before her breath hitched. Then she looked at me, eyes wild. You froze my accounts? I smiled. Not just yours. Adam's, too. She shot to her feet. You can't do this to me. You did it to yourself. I took a step forward, lowering my voice to something deadly calm. You thought I was dying. You thought I was weak. I leaned in just enough for her to see the amusement in my eyes. You forgot who I was. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but I saw the fight still in her. Good. Let her fight. Let her feel the desperation. Because no matter what she did next, I had already won. Checkmate Claire tried everything. She screamed, she pleaded, she threatened. She tried calling Adam, but he didn't pick up. I already knew why. The moment he walked into work, he was met with security escorting him out. The SEC was already digging into his records. By tomorrow morning, the news would be everywhere. His career? Over. His money? Gone. And Claire? She was next. She tried calling our lawyer, demanding answers, only to learn that she was officially cut out of my will. Not a single dime. That was when I saw it. The moment of realization. She had spent years planning to erase me from my own life. But in the end, I had erased her. And as she stood in the wreckage of her own making, gasping for any scrap of control, I walked past her, grabbed my coat, and smiled. Goodbye, Claire. And then I left. The aftermath of betrayal, I didn't look back when I left the house. I didn't need to. Claire was done. She just didn't know it yet. The night air was crisp as I stepped outside, the weight on my shoulders finally beginning to lift. For the first time in months, I breathed. I wasn't the victim anymore. I wasn't the dying man Claire and Adam had written off. I was the one in control. I got in my car, pulled out my phone, and made a single call. She knows, I said. On the other end, Mark chuckled. How's she taking it? Not well. Good, I smirked. I'll be at your office in 20. Adam Reeves's collapse. By the time I walked into Mark's office, he was already pouring us both a drink. You're going to want to see this. He turned his laptop toward me, and I leaned in. The news had already broken. Financial scandal rocks Reeves & Co. Ramirez. CEO Adam Reeves under investigation for insider trading and embezzlement. I scrolled through the article. It detailed everything, the shady deals, the falsified accounts, the quiet transfers to offshore banks. The proof I had handed over was airtight. Adam wasn't just getting fired, he was going to prison. I scrolled further. Anonymous sources suggest Reeves's affair with a married woman played a role in his downfall. I chuckled. That'll sting. Mark smirked. He tried to run earlier today, made it to his house before the feds showed up. They confiscated his computers, his accounts, everything. I nodded slowly. It was one thing to destroy a man's reputation. It was another to take everything from him. Adam thought he could steal my life. Now he had nothing. Claire's last. Standy returned home the next morning to find Claire still there. She was sitting in the living room, her hair a mess, eyes red from crying. She had a suitcase next to her, but she hadn't moved. Good. Let her sit in the wreckage for a while. I closed the door behind me, tossing my keys on the counter. You're still here. She looked up at me, and for the first time, I didn't see the cold, calculating woman I had married. I saw someone broken. Where am I supposed to go? Her voice was hollow. I tilted my head. Not my problem. Her hands clenched into fists. You did this to me. I smirked. You did this to yourself. She swallowed hard, staring at the floor. I loved you. I laughed. A real, deep laugh. You loved what I could give you, the money, the security, the life. But me? I shook my head. No. If you ever loved me, you wouldn't have done this. Tears welled in her eyes. Save it? I pointed at the door. Your time's up, get out. For a moment, she didn't move. I could see the battle inside her, the desperation, the humiliation, the need to cling to something, but there was nothing left for her here. Finally, she stood. She grabbed her suitcase with shaking hands and walked past me. At the doorway, she hesitated. You'll regret this. I didn't even blink. I already regret meeting you. She flinched. And then she was gone. I watched as she walked down the driveway, disappearing into whatever miserable future she had left. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Would you like to continue with Claire's complete downfall, Adam's sentencing, or your life after revenge? Let me know. The ruin of Claire and Adam Claire's departure wasn't the end of her suffering. It was just the beginning. She had nowhere to go. Adam wasn't answering her calls. Her bank accounts were frozen, her name blacklisted from any legal access to my estate. In less than 24 hours, the woman who once thrived on power and control had become nothing. She checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, a far cry from the luxury penthouse she had imagined herself living in after I was gone. But Claire wasn't the kind of woman to roll over and accept defeat, and that was her biggest mistake. Adam's last mistake. Adam Reeves's downfall wasn't just a scandal, it was a spectacle. The news ran wild with the story. CEO Adam Reeves arrested. In multi-million-dollar fraud scheme, insider trading and embezzlement uncovered. Cameras were waiting outside his home as the FBI escorted him out in handcuffs. His wife had already filed for divorce the moment the first headline dropped. His company? Dismantled. The board wasted no time cutting ties, declaring themselves victims of his rogue actions. I watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. The best part? Claire's name was starting to surface in the investigation. Not because she had any direct involvement in the fraud. She wasn't smart enough for that. But because of me, I had made sure there were enough digital breadcrumbs to suggest she had knowledge of Adam's shady dealings, that she had benefited from them. The FBI would spend months sifting through financials, and even if they didn't find enough to charge her, her reputation was tainted forever. Claire thought she was playing a long game, but I had rewritten the rules, the breaking of Claire. I got a call from Mark 2 weeks later. She's trying to fight back, he said, barely hiding his amusement. I smiled. What's she doing? She's been making calls. Lawyers, old friends, anyone who will listen. She's claiming you set her up, that you trapped her. I laughed. Let her scream into the void. She's broke too, Mark added. The motel kicked her. Out last night. No job, no money, no options. He paused. She's desperate. That caught my attention. Desperate people do stupid things. And Claire, she was the queen of stupid decisions. I leaned back in my chair. Let's keep an eye on her, Mark chuckled. Already on it. The last conversation, I expected Claire to break, but I didn't expect her to call me. It happened late at night, my phone buzzing with a number I hadn't seen in weeks. I let it ring for a while before finally answering. She didn't speak at first. Just heavy breathing, like she was trying to hold herself together. Then, finally, "You took everything from me." I exhaled slowly. "No, Claire. You took everything from yourself." Silence. Then a bitter laugh. "You really think you won?" I smiled. "I know I did." Another silence. I could almost hear the anger curling in her throat, the venom she wanted to spit, but had no strength left to release. "You ruined me," she whispered. "No," I corrected. "I gave you exactly what you deserved." Another long pause. Then, in a voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it, she muttered, "You'll regret this." The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long time, listening to the empty silence. And then, finally, I laughed, a deep, satisfied, victorious laugh, because Claire was finished, and I was finally free. The last act of desperation. Claire had lost everything. Her home, her money, her reputation. Adam was rotting in a jail cell, and every door she tried to open slammed shut in her face. But she wasn't done. I knew that call wasn't the end. Claire wasn't the kind of woman to disappear quietly into obscurity. She was a fighter, the kind that didn't care if she burned herself alive as long as she could drag someone down with her. So I waited. And sure enough, she made her move. The break-in had happened 3 nights later. I was sitting in my study, a glass of whiskey in hand, when I heard the faintest creak outside. I didn't move. Didn't react. I just listened. Another sound. The lock being tested. Then, a click. She was in. I set my glass down, exhaling slowly. "You really are desperate, aren't you, Claire?" I reached under my desk, wrapping my fingers around the cold steel of my handgun. I didn't even need to check if it was loaded. I already knew. Footsteps. Careful. Hesitant. She thought I was asleep. I let her believe it. She moved through the house, silent as a shadow, heading toward my office, and then I flicked the lamp on. "Hello, Claire." She froze. For a moment, she just stood there, silhouetted in the doorway, eyes wide with pure panic. Then she did what she always did. She lied. I just wanted to talk," she stammered. I smiled. "With a knife in your hand?" Her grip tightened around the blade she thought I hadn't noticed. I let the silence stretch. Let her feel it. Then I stood up, my chair scraping against the hard wood. The gun was still in my hand, though I hadn't raised it. I didn't need to. Her eyes darted to it. "I should shoot you," I said quietly. Her breath hitched. "But I won't." I tilted my head. "Because you're already dead." She flinched. I stepped closer, forcing her back. "Look at you, Claire. Breaking into a house you don't belong in. No money, no allies, no future." I smirked. "You're nothing." Tears welled in her eyes. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper. "You lost!" She shook with rage, her fingers tightening around the knife. Then the red and blue glow of police lights filled the room. Her breath caught. She turned just in time to see officers storming through the door. "Claire." "Bennett!" one of them barked, gun raised. "Drop the weapon, now!" For a moment she hesitated. Then her fingers loosened. The knife clattered to the floor. They grabbed her, wrenching her arms behind her back. I watched as they dragged her away, screaming, fighting, spitting venom at me even as they shoved her into the back of a squad car. She locked eyes with me one last time, pure hatred burning behind them. "You'll regret this," she screeched. I swear to God, you'll regret. The door slammed shut. The car pulled away, and just like that, Claire was gone. The end of Claire Bennett. Claire was charged with breaking and entering, attempted assault, and violating a court order, with no money for a good lawyer and no one willing to bail her out. She rotted in a holding cell while the legal system took its course. The news ran wild with the story. The once polished socialite reduced to nothing more than a desperate criminal, and me, I didn't even need to lift a finger. She had destroyed herself. The last time I saw her was in the courtroom. She was in an orange jumpsuit, shackled, her once perfect hair tangled and unkempt. She looked at me, eyes hollow, face pale. She knew. It was over. The judge sentenced her to 5 years. She whimpered, I smiled, and when they led her away, I didn't watch, because Claire Bennett no longer mattered. Moving forward with Claire gone and Adam rotting in prison, my world became quiet, peaceful. For the first time in years, I wasn't weighed down by betrayal. I wasn't haunted by anger. I was free. I moved out of that house, the one we had built together, the one that held too many ghosts. Bought a new place, smaller, simpler, and every morning I woke up without the ache of regret, because in the end, I won. And Claire, she was nothing more than a bad memory. The end. Would you like an epilogue exploring your life after revenge, or do you want a new story? Let me know. The calm. After the storm months passed, the fog of betrayal, which had clouded my mind for so long, finally lifted. I found myself walking through life with a steady step, no longer weighed down by the lies or the anger that had consumed me. It was as if a chain had been broken, leaving me lighter, free to breathe again. I sold the house we had shared, every room stained by memories of Claire's deceit. The new place was mine, a small apartment in a quieter part of the city, filled with the faint smell of wood and fresh paint. I took long walks along the river, basking in the solitude I'd craved for years, and each time I found myself near the water, I couldn't help but smile. I was a different man now. I had learned from every wrong turn, every misstep. I had been dragged through hell and come out the other side, stronger. The unexpected visitor, but peace, as I had come to learn, is always fleeting. One evening, about 6 months after Claire's sentencing, I received an unexpected visitor. It was a knock on my door, urgent and insistent. I opened it cautiously, only to find a man I didn't recognize. Mid-30s, sharp suit, a look in his eyes that spoke of something more than the ordinary. "Mr. Bennett?" he asked. I narrowed my eyes. "Who are you?" The man extended his hand. "I'm Detective Cole Spencer. I've been working on the case, involving your ex-wife, Claire Bennett." I stood frozen. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice smooth but authoritative. I stepped aside. He entered without waiting, his eyes scanning the apartment as if it were a crime scene. But there was something else behind his gaze, a sense of purpose, of knowledge. I closed the door behind him. "What's this about?" He hesitated, then looked me straight in the eyes. "There's been a development." The darker truth Spencer took a seat across from me. He was silent for a long moment, as if weighing his words carefully. Finally, he spoke. "Claire's story, her arrest, her trial, everything we thought we knew about her, it's not adding up." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" "She's not the only one we've been watching," he continued. "There's more to this case than we realized. Claire had help, and it wasn't just Adam Reeves." I leaned forward. "What are you saying?" Spencer paused, eyes flicking briefly to the window before returning to me. "Claire was part of a larger scheme, a conspiracy involving high-level figures, and your involvement, wasn't accidental." I felt my chest tighten. "I was just a pawn." He nodded grimly. Exactly. But you're not the only one. Claire wasn't acting alone. There's someone else, someone who's been pulling strings from behind the scenes. My heart raced. Who? Spencer leaned forward, his voice low. David Mercer. The plot unravels. My stomach sank. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Mercer. That piece of trash. He had been involved with Claire the moment I found out about their affair. He had been at the center of it all, using Claire as a tool, a weapon. But why? Spencer stood and began pacing. We have reason to believe Mercer orchestrated everything. The sabotage, the financial mess, the affair with Claire, all of it was a part of his plan to eliminate anyone standing in his way. I felt my hands tremble. I knew he wasn't talking about just me. Mercer had been plotting long before he ever crossed paths with Claire. But why? I muttered, almost to myself. Spencer turned to me. Mercer was after power. He was using Claire to destabilize you and Adam Reeves to secure his position. He never thought you'd fight back. A chill ran through me. So, Claire was a pawn to him too? Exactly. She was expendable. Spencer's voice dropped to a whisper. She thought she was outwitting you, but she never knew just how deep Mercer was involved. She was never going to get away with it. The final. Choice Spencer's words hung in the air like smoke, thick and choking. I had thought Claire's betrayal was the end of the story. But now, I realized it was only the beginning. I had a choice now. Walk away and leave the past behind, or dig deeper and confront the true mastermind behind it all. Where is he? I asked, my voice cold. Spencer smiled, a hint of respect in his eyes. That's the thing. We've been trying to track him down for months, but he's elusive. He knows how to disappear. I stood up, the weight of the decision settling over me like a shadow. I'll find him. Spencer's eyebrows raised. Are you sure about this? This isn't just about Claire anymore. I don't care, I said firmly. This ends now. The hunt begins, and so the game continued. This time, it wasn't just about Claire's betrayal. It was about something bigger. Mercer, the puppet master, was still out there, pulling strings, manipulating everyone he came into contact with. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had already taken down the two people I had trusted the most. Now, I was going to hunt down the one who had orchestrated it all from the shadows. And when I found him, I wouldn't show mercy. The hunt for Mercer I didn't waste any time. After Spencer left, I started making calls, digging through every contact I had and using every resource at my disposal. Mercer had managed to stay one step ahead of the authorities for months, but that would change. I wasn't going to give him the luxury of time. I turned to my lawyer, a man I had worked with for years, someone who had always been loyal to me. I didn't explain everything in detail. I didn't need to. I simply gave him a set of instructions. Do you have any leads on David Mercer? I asked, looking him straight in the eye. He hesitated, knowing my usual dispassion was replaced with something darker. There's been no sign of him in the city for weeks. He's probably hiding out in some foreign country by now. But I'll look into his financial records. He's always been careful, but even the careful slip up. I nodded. Do it. We'll find him. The hidden network a week passed with no word, but I wasn't idle. I spent my time piecing together fragments of Mercer's life, every single corner of his empire. I needed to understand him, to learn how he operated. I tracked down people from his past, old friends, business partners, even enemies. Each one offered me a piece of the puzzle. David Mercer had a way of disappearing, yes. But there were always breadcrumbs, little signs that led to his shadow. I followed those signs. I dug deeper into his connections, his old haunts, his safe houses. I spoke to men who had crossed paths with him years ago and walked away scarred. Each one told me the same thing. Mercer was always planning, always scheming. He was one step ahead of everyone, until, of course, he wasn't. The revelation. It was a quiet Wednesday when my lawyer finally called. His voice was sharp, excited. "I've found something." I barely let him finish. "Where?" "Not far from here. A storage unit, hidden in plain sight, tucked away in a small business district. No one would think to look twice at it. But when we checked the records, it turns out Mercer has been paying for it every month." I wasn't going to wait. I didn't have time for subtleties. I made a few calls, arranged for a team to accompany me, and drove straight to the location. The unit was in an industrial area, tucked behind a few abandoned buildings. I could already feel my pulse quicken. I knew deep down that this was it. The key to unraveling Mercer's carefully crafted network. I didn't bother with formalities. I instructed my team to break the lock. Inside, the room was filled with boxes, files, old computers, encrypted hard drives. There was a desk, papers scattered across it, and something that caught my eye, a photo. It was of Claire. But something was off. She wasn't the woman I remembered. She was different. Her eyes wild, her expression manic, and then the documents, contracts, non-disclosure agreements. Financial transactions that tied Claire to Mercer. My breath caught. It was clear now. Mercer had been building his empire off the back of people just like her, using them as pawns in his game of power. But there was something more. Something more sinister. Among the contracts was an outline for a final plan. The details were scarce, but it was unmistakable. Mercer had been working towards something big, and I was in the center of it. The final confrontation. The pieces clicked together rapidly. David Mercer wasn't just running from the law. He had been preparing for his own version of escape. He had planned everything. His disappearance, his empire, and his ultimate goal of getting rid of anyone who threatened his control. But I wasn't a threat anymore. I was his nemesis. I studied every file, cross-referencing his transactions, contacts, and movements. I traced his steps, finding a pattern that led me to a safe house, tucked away in a remote part of the city. By the time I reached it, the adrenaline was coursing through my veins. I was close now, too close to turn back. Spencer had given me all the intel I needed. I could feel the weight of the decision hanging in the air. It was no longer just about vengeance. It was about stopping a man who thought he could outsmart everyone. The face-off, the safe house, was quiet. Almost too quiet. I could hear the faint hum of a generator, the soft rustle of paper somewhere in the distance. I moved in, checking each corner, each room until I found it. The final room. David Mercer was sitting at a desk, staring at a screen. He didn't even flinch when I entered. "Looking for me?" he asked, his voice smooth, calculated. I stepped forward, my heart pounding, but my mind sharp. "I'm done chasing you." He didn't respond, but I could see the flicker of unease in his eyes. "I know everything," I said, my voice cold. "The fraud, the deals with Claire, the whole damn thing." He leaned back, unfazed. "You think you've won?" I already did. For a long moment, there was silence. Then Mercer smirked, as though he were toying with me. "You'll regret this," he said softly, but I could hear the tremor in his voice. The aftermath. The city was quieter after Mercer's death. The storm that had raged in my life for so long had finally settled, leaving behind a strange silence. I spent the following weeks reflecting on everything that had happened. The lies, the betrayal, the manipulation. I had destroyed the man who had tried to ruin me, but it came at a cost. The victory didn't feel as sweet as I had imagined. I still thought of Claire, of her part in all of this, but it was no longer the overpowering ache of betrayal. It was a dull, cold emptiness. She was gone, locked away behind bars for her role in Mercer's schemes, but the damage she had done lingered. I hadn't heard from her since the trial, and part of me almost wondered if I ever would. Maybe she had learned her lesson, or maybe she had simply vanished from the world I once knew. Either way, I knew that my life was irrevocably changed. I had learned things about myself, about strength, resilience, and the lengths I was willing to go for justice. But there were no easy answers. I moved away from the city, seeking a fresh start. The apartment I had once filled with the echoes of my pain was sold, and I left the ghosts of my past behind. The search for peace. I found a quiet little town by the coast, away from the hustle and bustle of the life I had known. It wasn't a permanent home, but it was a place to breathe, to heal. The small, weathered house I rented was nestled between a few other homes, with a view of the ocean that stretched for miles. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore was calming, distant but constant. I started spending my days walking along the beach, watching the tides come in and out. It was a simple life, but it was one I needed. There was still darkness inside me, a lingering reminder of everything I had endured, but here, in this quiet place, I began to let go of some of it. The memories of Claire and Mercer would always be with me, but they no longer controlled me. Unexpected encounters. One afternoon, as I was walking along the pier, I saw a familiar face. It took me a moment to place her, but then it clicked. It was one of the women I had briefly spoken to during my investigation of Claire. Her name was Sarah. She had been part of the network Mercer had used to gather information. She wasn't an accomplice, but she had been in the know. I hadn't seen her in months. She had been one of the first to vanish after the chaos, and I hadn't expected to see her again. She looked different, tired, worn down, but somehow free. She saw me, and for a split second I thought she might turn away. Instead, she walked toward me, her eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in a long time: hope. "You look different," she said, her voice soft, almost tentative. I nodded. "So do you." She smiled slightly. "I thought you might be, well, gone, after everything." I let out a short laugh. "You weren't the only one who thought that." She hesitated for a moment, then stepped closer. "I heard about Mercer, about Claire. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for what happened, for what we all got dragged into." I was surprised by the sincerity in her voice. I had always known Sarah wasn't a true believer in Mercer's cause, but seeing her here, offering an apology, was something unexpected. "Thank you," I said quietly. She glanced at the ocean. "I guess we're both trying to move on." "Trying?" I echoed. We stood there for a while, watching the waves crash, two people connected by a shared past that neither of us could escape. A new beginning? In the months that followed, Sarah and I stayed in touch. She had left the life she had been, part of long before Mercer's death, but the scars were still there. The world had a way of taking pieces of you when you weren't looking. We found solace in simple things. A cup of coffee shared on quiet mornings, the kind of conversation that didn't require words to be meaningful. There were no promises between us, no grand plans, just the understanding that we had both been through hell and that in some strange way we could heal together. I wasn't ready to fall in love again. Not yet. But in her presence, I found something I hadn't realized I was missing: companionship. It wasn't perfect, but nothing in life ever is. The rest of my life. The years passed, and the past faded, though it never disappeared entirely. The scars remained, but they became less sharp. The pain dulled, replaced by a quiet peace. I kept moving forward, finding purpose in small things. I became involved in the community, helped a few people who had struggled with their own battles, and even took up writing. I used the experiences I'd been through to craft stories, ones that spoke to the complexities of human nature, of betrayal and redemption. One day I realized I was no longer haunted by the past. It no longer had the same power over me. Claire, Mercer, they were just names in the pages of my history now. I had emerged from the wreckage of my old life, not as the man I once was, but as someone new. The silent echoes of the past. Even in this quiet town, even with the peaceful rhythms of my new life, the past has a way of creeping up, like the tide that never stays still. I thought I could bury it. I thought I could leave it all behind. The pain, the loss, the ghosts of Claire and Mercer. But every so often the past finds a way to stir, to remind me of its presence. One evening, as the sun was sinking into the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I received a letter. It was hand-delivered, no return address, the paper thick and worn. My heart raced as I opened it. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the ink bold, with each letter carefully formed. I know what you did. At first I thought it was some sort of cruel prank, a reminder of the past that should have been left buried. But then I read on. Claire is out, there, watching. And she's not alone. She's closer than you think. The message was short, but it hit me like a lightning bolt. I read the words over and over, each time a new wave of unease rising within me. Claire? Watching? It didn't make sense. She was in prison. Everyone knew that. No one escaped from that place. But someone was playing a game, and it wasn't over. The unraveling, I didn't waste any time. The paranoia crept in slowly, like shadows, in the corners of my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I couldn't shake the possibility that someone was still out there. Someone who knew too much. I reached out to Spencer, though I wasn't sure who I could trust. Anymore, I needed answers. She's supposed to be locked up, Spencer said when I explained the letter. There's no way she could have gotten out without us knowing. But, he paused, his voice growing tight. There are people who want to make you pay. People who didn't get the message when Mercer went down. Maybe she's not alone in this after all. I didn't need to hear any more. I already knew. This was no coincidence. Claire's vendetta was alive again. And this time, it wasn't. Just her. There was someone else pulling the strings. The game was on. The hunt for Claire. I didn't trust anyone except the few people who had helped me before. Spencer, Sarah, and my lawyer were the only allies I had left. Together, we started to track Claire's movements. Her escape had been meticulously planned. She had covered her tracks in ways no one could have predicted, using resources that were just as hidden as her plans. It was clear that someone powerful, had been helping her. I had to go back to where it all began, to the heart of Mercer's operations. The abandoned warehouse, the black market deals, the hidden files. I revisited every lead that had once seemed irrelevant. It was there, in the depths of Mercer's old lair, that I found it. A hidden ledger with names, dates, and transactions that tied Claire to a new player, someone I had never heard of before. This person, whoever they were, had deep pockets and deeper influence, and Claire, somehow, had become their pawn in a much larger game. I wasn't the only target anymore. A final showdown. The final confrontation loomed ahead. I could feel the tension in the air, like a storm on the horizon. The pieces of the puzzle had fallen into place, and I knew where I had to go. I found her, not in a prison, not hiding in some remote corner of the world, but in the one place she thought I would never look, right here, in the city I'd left behind. I stood in front of the old apartment building where she had once lived, now abandoned and decaying. The windows were boarded up, but the door was unlocked. Inside, I could hear the faint sound of footsteps, the soft creak of the floorboards. I moved quickly, cautiously, keeping my senses alert. And there she was, Claire, but not the woman I remembered. She had changed, her eyes cold, calculating, and standing beside her was the man who had orchestrated her escape, a face I knew well but had almost forgotten. Adam Reeves, the very man who had betrayed me. The man I thought had gone silent. They were working together, but it was clear that Claire was in charge now. The power had shifted. "You shouldn't have come back," Claire said, her voice a mixture of bitterness and contempt. I could feel the rage building inside me, but I kept it controlled, focused. I wasn't here for a fight. I was here to finish this, once and for all. "You made a mistake," I said calmly. "You thought you could play me, but you forgot who I am. I won't let you destroy me again." Adam stepped forward, but Claire stopped him with a gesture. She was smarter than this, more calculating. "You think you can stop us? You think you can stop me?" Claire's voice echoed off the walls. "You're a fool. I'm not done with you. We never finished our game, and now you'll learn how it ends." I raised my gun, not as a threat, but as a promise. It ends tonight. The final move. What followed wasn't a battle of physical strength. It was a battle of wills. Words, carefully chosen, cutting deeper than any knife. The calm, after the storm. The months that followed were quieter than I had ever anticipated. The dust had settled, the players were taken off the board, and Claire's return to the shadows had been the final chapter in a long, agonizing story. But I found that peace came with a strange emptiness. There was no victory parade, no applause, just a quiet, almost eerie stillness. I moved forward, though it wasn't as easy as I had hoped. The weight of everything I had lost, everything I had been through, lingered in the corners of my mind. There were days when I would sit by the window of my new home, looking out at the horizon, wondering what could have been. But then I would remember how far I'd come. I had reclaimed my life. My future was mine again, free from the chains that had once bound me. The first step forward, it started with small things. A walk through the park where the air felt lighter than it had in years. A conversation with a stranger that didn't carry the weight of my past. I began to rebuild, piece by piece. The work that I had once thought impossible, moving on, rediscovering myself, became my new obsession. I poured myself into new endeavors, things I had never allowed myself to enjoy before. Writing, travel, simple pleasures that had always been denied me in the rush of surviving. The town I had settled in felt more like home with each passing day. I knew the faces of the people around me, but I remained an enigma, a quiet figure who watched the world move by, not yet ready to jump back in, but no longer feeling tethered to the past. A new opportunity. One day, as I was browsing a small bookshop, in town the owner, a kindly older man, struck up a conversation with me. "You know," he said, as he handed me a dusty book on local history, "I've been running this place for a long time, but I could use some help, someone who knows how to write a little more creatively. You've got a good eye for details." I hadn't been expecting to hear that, but there was something about his words, the sincerity in his offer, that caught my attention. It wasn't just about the job. It was about a chance to finally do something new. Without thinking too much about it, I agreed. The bookstore became a new chapter in my life, and with it came a sense of purpose I hadn't realized I had been craving. I worked in the back, cataloging books, writing small articles for the shop's newsletter, and talking with the occasional customers who wandered in. It was a quiet, steady pace, not too fast, not too slow, just enough to keep me grounded, and an unexpected visitor. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, just as I was finishing up a newsletter article, the door to the bookstore opened. A bell rang above the door, and I looked up to see a familiar face standing in the threshold. Sarah. Her eyes were filled with something I couldn't quite read. Concern, curiosity, maybe even a touch of uncertainty. I was wondering if I could speak with you, she said, her voice hesitant but steady. I motioned for her to sit, and she did, carefully, as if trying not to disturb the fragile peace that had settled over my life. I know this may be the last place you expected me to show up, she began, folding her hands on the table, but I needed to talk to you. After everything, I realized I didn't really thank you for everything you did. I looked at her, not knowing exactly how to respond. I didn't need her thanks, not really. But there was something in her expression that made me pause. It wasn't just about what happened, she continued. I thought I was running from my past too, but I wasn't ready to face what I had done. You gave me the courage to start over. I sat back in my chair, letting her words settle. Maybe, just maybe, that was something I had never fully understood, that by confronting my demons I had given others a path to follow as well. I'm just trying to find my own peace now, Sarah said softly, as if she had finally found the right words. I nodded slowly. We all are. Looking ahead. The years drifted by, and the shadows of my past receded further with each passing day. I no longer felt haunted by Claire or Mercer or the web of deceit that had entangled us all. It was like the final pages of a book that had been difficult to finish, but had brought closure when it was done. I kept working at the bookstore, occasionally publishing articles, and even starting to write my own book, a memoir of sorts, not of vengeance, but of survival. Of how one could pick up the pieces after the storm had passed, how it was possible to live again after being torn apart. I didn't have all the answers, but I had enough to know that I had finally, truly moved forward, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I realized that life had a way of offering second chances. Not in grand gestures, but in small moments, like a quiet evening by the water, a conversation with a friend, or the chance to begin anew. And for the first time in years, I understood that it was enough. A letter from the past years passed, and life began to feel as though the storm had finally cleared. Yet, as much as I had embraced my new life, the past, as it often does, still found a way to remind me of its existence. It was a quiet morning. When the letter came, an ordinary day that suddenly shifted beneath me. The envelope was old, yellowed at the edges. My name was scrawled across the front in a handwriting I had long since erased from my memory. It was Claire's handwriting. For a moment, I froze. My fingers hovered over the paper, and my mind raced through 100 possibilities. She was out. She had escaped. This was her revenge. But no, this was different. I opened it slowly, cautiously, as if the words inside would have the power to pull me back into the past once more. And as I read, I realized the letter wasn't from Claire herself. It was from someone else, a person who, despite everything, still had a piece of the puzzle I thought I had solved. You think it's over, but it's not. The truth will come, even if you've buried it deep. Find what she left behind. The letter had no signature, just those cryptic words. The weight of unfinished business. I could have ignored it. I could have dismissed it as another misguided attempt to draw me back into a world I had left behind. But something gnawed at me, something deep within. It was the weight of unfinished business, the knowledge that I hadn't truly closed the door on Claire's chapter in my life. The first thing I did was return to the old apartment, the one place where everything had started, where Claire and Mercer's betrayal had shattered my world. I expected nothing but silence. But when I walked through the broken door, I was hit with a familiar smell, a scent I hadn't recognized in years. It was the scent of old books, of a place long forgotten, of dust and secrets. As I carefully walked through the empty, decaying space, my eyes were drawn to a small wooden box on the floor. It wasn't there the last time I visited. It was an unexpected addition to a place that had once held nothing but sorrow. Inside the box, wrapped in a faded cloth, were papers, documents, photographs, and a small black journal. My heart skipped. The revelation. I took the journal in my hands, carefully flipping through the pages. The handwriting was Claire's, but it was different from the angry, bitter words she had once scrawled in her letters. These pages were personal, almost intimate. It was a confession. She wrote about her regrets, about the choices she made and the people she had hurt. And as I read further, I realized she had left this behind not for me, but for herself. I thought I could control everything. I thought I could keep you under my thumb, keep you tangled in my web. But in the end, it was me who was trapped. I can't undo what I've done, but I need you to know the truth. The person who helped me wasn't just someone from my past. He's a ghost, one who will haunt us all, forever. David Mercer wasn't the mastermind, just another pawn in a much bigger game. My breath caught in my throat. The journal spoke of someone more dangerous than I had ever realized, someone who had pulled the strings from the very beginning, someone who had been manipulating us all. The ghost in the machine, as I read on, the journal revealed the identity of this shadowy figure. The name meant nothing to me at first, until I researched it. Victor Haynes. He was a name buried deep in the archives of corporate history, a man whose reputation was shrouded in whispers, a man who had worked behind the scenes of some of the most high-profile business dealings of the last decade. His influence was subtle, but far-reaching, and it became clear that Claire had been a small part of a much larger operation. This was no longer just about revenge. This was about uncovering a network of power and deceit that reached far beyond Claire and Mercer. The final game. I couldn't let it go. The past had finally caught up with me in ways I had never anticipated. I knew that the answers I sought were buried in a place I never thought I would go. Back to the world Claire had tried to pull me into, the world I had once escaped. But now, it was different. I wasn't the same man I had been. I had rebuilt myself, stronger, sharper, and this time, I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for the truth. A new path with the journal in hand and the evidence of Victor Haynes's involvement, I reached out to the few people who could help me navigate this treacherous path. Spencer was the first to agree, his eyes sharp with the realization that this was much bigger than anyone had thought. Together, we began to trace the connections, pulling the threads of power and influence until we found ourselves face to face with Victor Haynes himself. It wasn't an easy confrontation. Haynes was a ghost in the truest sense of the word, always watching, always staying just out of reach. But he had underestimated how far I was willing to go.